And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. An impact assessment is a planning and decision-making tool used to assess the potential positive and negative effects of proposed projects. Impact assessments can consider a wide range of factors and proposed measures to mitigate projects' adverse effects. We begin today's Open Connection with the President and CEO of the Mining Association of Canada, Pierre Groton.
And I think we need to re-examine the Impact Assessment Act project list with a view to what future mines will look like. The most recent underground mines to emerge in the last few years in Canada are fully electric, with zero emissions, less waste, safer working conditions because the air doesn't have any diesel fumes. Do we need to undergo both a federal and provincial assessment for such projects when the impacts are so much less? Or can we not, as Canadians, have trust in our provincial and Indigenous governments to carry out those evaluations on their own? So I'm confident we can reduce the time it takes to permit a new mine without compromising on meaningful and inclusive consultation with Indigenous peoples or rigorous environmental assessment. In fact, by way of example, two of the fastest federal assessments in the past few years were in Quebec, where Canada and the Cree collaborated on a single assessment for two lithium mines. I note that the Cree signed the first modern treaty in Canada. It's one of the most attractive places for our sector in the country because the Cree are in charge. It is increasingly understood that co-led or Indigenous-led assessments are not slower, they're faster. And I applaud the BC and Tahltan governments on their cooperative approach to new projects in Tahltan territory. Unless we do better, mines will not be built in time to meet our shared climate change, supply chain security, or critical minerals goals. Indigenous communities will also miss out on the opportunity to benefit from the development of new mines. If we do better, we will definitely have to invest more in attracting, recruiting, and developing a highly skilled, safe, and diverse Canadian workforce, but that's a challenge I welcome. The good news is that there has been some progress. After a shaky start, the Impact Assessment Agency has started to do a better job in its approach to new project reviews. And of course, here in BC, it's only this province that has negotiated an agreements with the federal government on what's called substitution, where only one of the two governments undertakes the assessment for both governments, so it's one project, one review. And there is evidence now that federal regulatory departments are engaging earlier in the assessment process, hopefully with a view to faster post-IA permitting. And the federal government has also taken many positive steps on the fiscal front to stimulate new mining activity, particularly in critical minerals. The fall 2022 economic statement and 2023 budget both contain measures, the latter including a reallocation of $1.5 billion within the Strategic Innovation Fund to support projects in sectors including clean tech, critical minerals, and industrial transformation, as well as a clean technology manufacturing tax credit for new machinery and equipment used to extract, process, or recycle critical minerals. And I'm confident this will help attract new investment to the industry. The Canada Infrastructure Bank also committed at least $1 billion to support Indigenous infrastructure projects in priority sectors, including clean power, green infrastructure, public transit, broadband, trade, and transportation. To date, most of the government's attention and success has been downstream, attracting new investments in EVs and battery manufacturing. We need to attract more investment into mining, or our position in the race for advanced technology manufacturing will falter. The legislation to implement the Clean Technology Manufacturing Tax Credit is urgently needed if we are to maintain an active position in the critical minerals race. The federal government's interest in supporting access to capital by Indigenous communities to further strengthen their participation, including equity participation in natural resources projects, including mining, is a good idea that needs to be acted upon now when the opportunities are before us. There are several projects on the near to medium term horizon. The Casino project in the Yukon, Crawford Nickel in Ontario, Galore Creek, not too far from here, Eagle's Nest in the Ring of Fire, and multiple mine life extensions, including Highland Valley, in the Sudbury and Manitoba nickel belts, at Raglan in northern Quebec, and Voisey's Bay on the east coast. We need to make these happen. These challenges notwithstanding, let me finish with some optimism. We know that everybody in the world is trying to seize this moment and rise to the challenges facing the world. And Canada has some obvious strengths. We have a very established mining, mineral processing, smelting, and manufacturing sector. We have a significant mining supply business, the third largest in the world, which now includes many Indigenous-owned businesses. You know, in Voisey's Bay on the east coast, 90% of procurement at that mine is with Indigenous-owned businesses. 90%. That's absolutely outstanding. We have the Toronto Stock Exchange and the TSXV, the world's top mining and exploration listing venues. Our clean and reliable electricity network is the envy of many, and our political system is stable. We may not be recruiting enough people to work in the sector, but we outperform the world in Indigenous inclusion by a wide margin. We also boast some of the best mining schools in the country. And perhaps most importantly, we embraced strong ESG policies through standards like TSM long before it was fashionable to do so, years ahead of many other mining jurisdictions. And the value of this cannot be overstated as businesses rightly feel the pressure to deliver premium products with respect for Indigenous rights and the environment. We are well positioned to reap the benefits of the energy transition, and many Indigenous communities stand to benefit more than ever before.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Nominal GMP generated by the mining industry has exploded in recent years. Mineral prices have risen faster than any other commodity since 2000, fueling the boom in output, investment, and jobs. Let us return the conversation to see the changing face of mining.
30 or 40 years ago, everybody on the stage would have looked like me and Pierre. And it doesn't look that way anymore. And so it's an interesting twist over the course of my career, I'm sure, for Pierre. So turning it over to you, Frida, can you talk a little bit about opportunities that you see through your work for people to get involved in the mining sector, with Pierre's, talking about the capacity issues and whatnot, and you're so involved with community engagement with Skeena Resources and have such deep ties into the communities. How are you getting more people in mining?
Can you hear me? Is this working? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I think there has always been opportunity for Indigenous people in mining. I was actually at Eskay Creek the first time it operated for 14 years. I've returned. So I've been in the mining industry for 29 years, and I've seen vast, changes over the years. But I think there's a great opportunity to partner with the local communities near you and look at skills differently, assess skills differently. There are extreme transferable skills locally that are close to you that mines don't have to pay to transport to the workplace, especially in critical positions. If you have somebody who's trained, there are usually in every mine there is equipment that is specific to that mine. If you have someone who's an hour away, who knows how to fix those when it goes down. I know, it's a pretty big deal when an operation goes down. If you have someone very close who's trained to come in and deal with that, like how beneficial is that? And there was a skill shortage while I was at Eskay Creek, and none of the Tahltans left. Everybody stayed. They weren't interested in going elsewhere. So how valuable is a workforce that you don't have to pay to get there? That's not going to leave you in a skill shortage. incredibly valuable. So there's tremendous opportunity for mining operations to look at skills differently, to value those transferable skills that are there, and train people for critical positions.
Kylie, you're on the front end of mining. You're a geologist, and with AME, on the exploration side of things, that's another opportunity, perhaps, even before we get to operations, before something gets permitted and starts under construction. Maybe can you talk a little bit about some of the opportunities at early stages in mining development that maybe people aren't familiar with, that have really good opportunities for those transferable skills that Frida was talking about?
Exploration we describe ourselves as the startups of mining. So we're the small projects, often hundreds of projects at any one time around the province that are looking for the minerals that Pierre described, the copper, the nickel, the cobalt, all those different things. And each exploration project, although small, connects with about 10 different service providers in the local communities. So Terrace itself is one of the hubs for exploration in British Columbia. And if you're not working on the project itself as an exploration geologist or a manager, there are so many different service and supply partners that each exploration project has to work with. So there are labs that analyze the rocks. There are drilling companies that get those rocks out of the ground. There's the hotels, there's the rental car companies, there's environmental consultants, archaeology consultants. There's so many different jobs that each particular company is working with 10, 12, 15 partners on that project. So to get into mining, it's not just that visual of driving a truck, which is, pretty cool, but it's not just about the operations and driving the vehicles and getting the material out of the ground. It's also those support roles, including the scientific roles of being a geologist and being that explorer that walks around on the ground that maybe you know really well, but you look at it through a different lens of, are these the rocks that we're interested in? Are these the rocks that contain copper? So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for a whole range of jobs. I didn't even touch on accounting, lawyers. All these partnerships need people to write them and get people to sign them. So there's lots of opportunity.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. The Mining Industry Human Resources Council is designed to bring employer, educator, and community together in partnership. So while the employer's training and hiring goals are met, communities are also to provide their members with rewarding local work opportunities. Let us return the conversation as Pierre shares more about this council.
I did want to actually highlight for the folks in this room, if you haven't heard of the Mining Industry Human Resources Council, or MIR, that's a body that we support as MAC, financially support, but they have secured lots of resources from the federal government to develop and implement initiatives specifically to address the human resource needs of the industry. They have developed tools and trainings, in particular targeting Indigenous people and Indigenous women, but they've also developed programs for interns and for co-op placements for youth. They've developed programs for recognizing credentials to ensure the transferability of credentials for many different mining occupations. So it's mir.ca, MIHR.ca. If you're not familiar with it, you can go there, reach out to them. They can make the resources available and point you in the right direction if you want to get involved in the sector. There's, in terms of, what are some of the examples? I mean, there's so many to turn to, but I think it's, there's everything from, in the oil sands where, Suncor and has actually entered into a joint venture with the local First Nation on their tank farm project, where I think it's now 37% Indigenous owned. So our industry, as I mentioned in my speech, is sort of slower to get involved in equity. It's a huge capital investment. Our industry does come with risk. Some of the better opportunities on the equity side is in support of our industry. Like, rather than taking a stake in the mining project itself, you could have a stake in the power generation that goes to the mine, or in a whole range of different activities that support the mine. That tends to be a more reliable, lower risk form of equity participation. But really everything's open, and it's really up to communities to sit down, work with the local companies and identify, and TSM helps to create the space for that, identify what those best opportunities are that most meet your community needs and interests.
Thanks. Frida, are you able to speak a little bit about the relationship between Skeena and Tahltan and the nature of that arrangement?
Sure. So Eskay Creek is located completely in Tahltan territory, in the asserted territory of the Skiikamaha, and our transportation route goes through Gitinyao territory and Nisga'a territory. The Skeena is the proponent in the Section 7 agreement between the provincial government and the Tahltan Nation. And the agreement will span over a few years. There are places in the time frame where the province and the nation have to come together and both consent to moving to the next step. There is at the end of the process, the Tahltan will provide consent or not for the environmental assessment certificate. So it's the first. And we need to have free and informed consent to be able for this project to move forward from the Tahltan Nation.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
As communication specialist and geoscientist, Kylie Williams writes about the science and technology that make mineral exploration and mining more efficient and sustainable. In this final segment of Open Connection, Kylie shares how the mining industry is changing.
So AME Roundup is a conference that happens every January in Vancouver. And this year will be the 11th anniversary of the Gathering Place, which is similar to this event. It's industry, government, and First Nations coming together to talk about what works, what doesn't, have those hard conversations, and to create new opportunities. So the Gathering Place happens on Tuesday and Wednesday of the conference. But in terms of attracting the next generation, we also have a program with Minerals Ed. Minerals Ed is an education group that brings schools and teachers, elementary and high schools kids to the conference to introduce them to the industry and the opportunities, and for them to meet the service and supply companies and the scientists. We have the Minerals Ed program, we have the Gathering Place. This year, for the first time, we're having an Indigenous marketplace, so I am on the lookout for vendors. So if you know anyone, please come and see me. And just on the Sunday before Roundup, we also have Discovery Day, which is a free day for the public to come and learn about earth science and mining and minerals, and again, all the opportunities in the industry. So like you were saying before, the content has changed a lot. At Roundup, it's always a very technical conference. But over the last 10, 15 years, the importance of Indigenous participation and partnerships has built in the program, and we talk about that a lot more than we did 10, 15 years ago, that's for sure.
I'd like to add a little bit. The Tahltan central government takes a youth from Tahltan Youth Also, we've taken Nisga'a youth and Casca youth to the conference so they can participate and they can learn more about the mining industry. It's been very successful. It's happened, I think it's probably more than 5 years it's gone on. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, so the BC Supreme Court decision came down about 2 weeks ago, and it was the result of the Gikala, and then they were joined by the Haudenosaunee Nation to question the order of process for mineral claims in British Columbia, which is managed under the Mineral Tenure Act. So the result of that was that there'll be no changes for 18 months, but in those 18 months, First Nations, industry, and the government need to work together to modernise the process. So at the moment, Indigenous engagement is kicked off at a slightly later stage in the process, and the challenge before us and the opportunity before us is to find a way to include First Nation partners and Indigenous peoples earlier in that process. So the process of obtaining a mineral claim in British Columbia, it is an online system. You click and basically express your interest in an area that might contain the rocks that contain the minerals that we're interested in. So maybe there are concentrations of copper or gold or nickel in that area. And once you have that piece of land, in terms of you have claimed the mineral claim, then you get to start exploring there. But you're not allowed to do anything physically until you have a notice of work permit. And at the moment, the notice of work permit is what gives you, basically the government then starts the conversation with the relevant First Nations. And that's when it kicks in at this point. So the conversations we're having over the next 18 months are how to include First Nations engagement earlier in the process, and also to maintain the competitiveness of the industry, because exploration companies are competing for funding to make these projects work, because before it's a mine, there's no income, so you're not selling anything. So they rely on investors from around the world to fund that exploration work. And so, yeah, over the next 18 months, we're working with our Indigenous peoples and government to talk about a way that we can make an inclusive process that is respectful of the Declaration and respectful of the Indigenous partners, but also maintains the competitiveness of the industry, so we can find those minerals and metals that we need for electric vehicles and that we need for solar panels. So yeah, that's the challenge before us. And I think what has happened is that this process was slowly modernizing over the last 5 or 10 years, but this court case and the findings of the BC Supreme Court have shone a spotlight on this particular legislation and have said, all right.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.